In this video, we're going to be going over question 5-6 from the text, and I'm going to be using a technique for assigning R and S configuration found at this website, masteringorganicchemistry.com, where it's Introduction to Assigning R and S Rules. So I'm going to be pulling some images from this website to use as examples for how to do the R and S configuration. Here we have letter A. I'm going to go in and take note of the fact that I have a chiral carbon with 4 different things around it, and I need to assign priorities for each of these different groups coming off of that carbon. You go by atomic weight. You go one atom at a time. So to begin with, I'm going to be comparing the first atom out off of that carbon. So these yellow ones are the ones I'm comparing. And I'm going to go by atomic weight. So my first priority group is that oxygen. My fourth priority group is the hydrogen. However, the 2 carbons I can't really compare just by looking carbon to carbon. So I'm going to go to the next atom out. For this top group, the next atom out would be a hydrogen. For this next group, this carbon has 2 hydrogens, but it also has another carbon. So that next atom out would win. So my group number 2 is going to be this one, and my group number 3 is going to be this one. Now, at this point, what you need to do is look and see if your lowest priority group has dashes, because you want to rotate this molecule so that the lowest priority group is going to the back. Well, our lowest priority group has a wedge, so that's a problem. Somehow we need to address how to get that lowest priority group to go to the back. So here we have a screenshot from that website I just referenced, where you've got a situation where your lowest priority group is that hydrogen. You've assigned your priorities. You somehow need to flip this thing in your brain to where your lowest priority group is going to the back. And that's not always easy to do. So here's some kind of rules to help you come up with the right answer if you can't mentally flip that in your brain. So the way we have it drawn right now, our arrows, like if we were to draw an arrow that followed priority 1, 2, 3, we would assign this as an S. But since we have our lowest group on a wedge instead of on a dash, we want to reverse the rule. Okay, so the way it's drawn is an S. We're going to call this an R, because if you just need to flip the wedge and the dash, you just flip what the letter of what you say it should be. So this one looks like an S, but because we need to flip the dash and the wedge, it is actually an R. It gets a little more complicated if your lowest priority group is on one of these lines. For example, here we have letter B. When I go to assign my groups, bromine is highest priority, then this one, then this one. Hydrogen, my lowest priority group, is in the plane of the paper. Okay, so my little wedge dash reverse rule is not going to work. We need some other way to address that. So here we have another screenshot from that website where they're recommending 3 steps for how to determine R and S when group 4, your lowest priority group, is in the plane of the page. So step 1, you want to swap the number 4 group with whichever one is in the back. So I'm going to be swapping my lowest priority group, which is hydrogen, with the one that's in the back, bromine. Okay. And then I'm going to redraw it with those 2 things swapped. That's step 2. Now that I have redrawn it, I'm going to put my priorities back in. This is priority 1, 2, 3, and 4. The way I have it drawn in this swapped version, follow your arrow, this would be an R configuration. Step 3, though, is very important. You have to flip the result. Because we swapped it, we need to flip what we get. So our actual answer here is going to be S. So you had to flip your lowest priority group with the thing that was in the back, redraw it, figure out the configuration, and then flip your answer. let's take a look at letter C. In letter C, my chiral carbon is this one right here. Okay, so I'm going to be assigning my priorities. Let's do the easy ones first. I know that this is my priority number 4. Hydrogen loses every time. My priority number 3 is going to be this one because that carbon represents kind of an N group. Nothing else is attached to it. Okay? So then it gets a little more complicated for this carbon and this carbon. In order to assign those, we need to go to the next atom out. Well, I bump into a double bond when I go out to the left. And if you'll keep in mind, we're supposed to pretend like a double bond gets broken, and whatever went out this way is now bonded here, and whatever went out this way is now drawn as another bond here. So that's the way I need to think about a double bond. Now, in terms of my priority, when I go to compare the next carbons out, like if I'm looking at this one, it's got 2 carbons coming off of it. This one has 1, 2 carbons coming off of it. But when you go out to these, it's an N group, it stops. This one, however, has another carbon coming off. So my priority number 1 is going to be this one, and my priority number 2 is going to be this one. That was the toughest part about this one. The hydrogen is already drawn going back, so it's got the dashes. Now we just need to figure out our configuration. It went it went clockwise, so that is the R configuration. For letter D, we really need to redraw this thing so that we can see more of a perspective view of what's going on with our dashes and our wedges. So recognize that when you're looking down at this structure, this chlorine is coming out at you, this hydrogen's going back. So that's how I've drawn that. The chlorine has a wedge and the hydrogen has a dash. The other thing I want to point out, you don't want to break in the plane, in the 2 lines that are from the plane. Like you want those 2 together and then your dash and your wedge together. If you had done a wedge here and then your dashed group coming up this way, in between these 2, you would have run into a problem. So keep the 2 things that are in the plane right side by side, and the 2 things that are out of the plane are also side by side. In this example, we do have 2 carbons that we need to identify. Both of these are chiral carbons, so they will both end up being assigned either an R or an S. So let's start with that one on the left. My chlorine is definitely my highest priority. My next highest priority, I would go this direction, okay, then this one, and then this one. And thankfully, my hydrogen is already going back, so my arrow goes counterclockwise like that. So that carbon is going to be an S carbon. Now we need to assign the other group. Chlorine is still the number 1. This is the number 2. This is the number 3, and hydrogen's the number 4. However, hydrogen is not going back, it's coming out. Since hydrogen is on a wedge, what we're going to do is get our answer and then flip our answer. So right now, according to the way it's drawn, it's going this way, okay, which we would call R, but that's not right. We need to flip our answer. It is actually an S situation because hydrogen was on a wedge instead of a dash. Okay, so this structure has an S configuration. Letter E is going to be very similar to letter D, but one side of it is switched. So I'm going to redraw it. So I've redrawn it, and note that I have kept these lines side by side, and then my dash and my wedge are side by side. Now, when I redraw it, I notice that I do have 2 carbons that need to be assigned. Okay. Let's assign priorities. I'm going to start with that left carbon. Chlorine is the top priority. Over this direction is the second priority, and then coming this direction is the third, and hydrogen is the 4th. The way it is currently drawn, it looks like this would be an S configuration, but Since the hydrogen is on a dash and is on a wedge instead of a dash, we need to flip our answer. This is actually the R configuration. So up here on the structure, I'm going to put an R for that particular carbon. For my other carbon, I go in and I assign priorities. Chlorine wins. This one's number 2, number 3, and number 4. The way it is currently drawn, we're going to the right, but because my hydrogen here is on a wedge instead of a dash, I'm going to just flip my answer. This one is an S. So in this case, I have an R and an S carbon. So I hope you have found these rules helpful. I did get them from this website, which you can find pretty quickly on Google. If you do Mastering Organic Chemistry R and S, you should find this website pretty quickly. Let me know if you have any questions.